Janice, thanks. And now to the murder-suicide involving pro wrestler Chris Benoit. Speculation is running wild. Did steroids play a role, or is there another explanation? We have an exclusive interview with WWE Chairman Vince McMahon in just a moment. But first, an update on the story from NBC's Mike Betcher.
Chris Benoit's home sits empty. Police and the curious are gone, but the mystery remains.
The greatest of all time.
Why did the famous professional wrestler methodically, over the course of a weekend, strangle his wife, suffocate his 7-year-old son, then hang himself?
Won the Royal Rumble match!
Anabolic steroids are one focus of the investigation, a controversial muscle-building substance found at the murder scene.
There were a lot of prescription medication.
Depression, paranoia, and violent outbursts known as roid rage are linked with steroid use.
It's going to make you a little more aggressive.
Lex Luger, a former wrestling colleague of Benoit who says alcohol and steroids nearly destroyed his own life, suspects a link.
Obviously, if they were in his home, let's face it, there's a pretty good chance he was on them.
In 2003, Nancy Benoit filed for divorce and requested court-ordered protection from her husband, Chris. She later withdrew the divorce petition, but court records indicate she was scared by her husband's behavior.
Nancy, at that time, felt that she wanted a divorce from Chris, also felt, apparently, from the filing of the temporary protective order, that she was in some sort of a danger from him.
Benoit going to the top rope.
His friends say Chris Benoit was a gentle strongman who knew the dangers of steroid use. His fellow wrestler and close friend Eddie Guerrero died in 2005 from heart failure linked to steroid use.
Give me some good shots.
In 2003, Curt Hennig, known on the wrestling circuit as Mr. Perfect, died from a drug overdose. Hennig's father blamed steroids and painkillers for his son's death. World Wrestling Entertainment, Benoit's employer, says it's wrong to speculate that steroid use was responsible for this tragedy. The WWE says it tested Benoit for steroid use in April and the results were negative. Now, police must wait weeks for toxicology reports to determine if steroids were in the blood of the man known as the Canadian Crippler. Mike Betcher, NBC News, Atlanta.
And WWE Chairman Vince McMahon is here for an exclusive interview. Good morning to you, Mr. McMahon.
Good morning.
It's my understanding that it was your organization, WWE, that contacted the authorities on Monday and said, you need to get to Chris Benoit's home. There's something that's not right. Can you take me through what happened?
Well, he was scheduled for a live event in Beaumont, Texas, and it was very much unlike Chris not to make live events.
And that was on Saturday, correct?
Yes, that's correct. And from there, our office contacted Chris to try and rearrange flights and things of that nature so that he would come in on Sunday for the pay-per-view, and actually late that Saturday night into the pay-per-view in Texas. And that was the last we heard of him. The flight was changed, and obviously when he didn't show up on Sunday, we knew that there was something drastically wrong, because his MO was definitely to make all of his engagements. He was a consummate professional from a business standpoint. So we knew something was really wrong. His friends could not contact him. He was not answering the phone. So that's why we sent the authorities over to investigate.
But he apparently was contacting friends through text messaging.
There were 2 text messages to 2 of his friends early Sunday morning at like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. They were very strange, hence another reason to contact the authorities. But it was things of like the side doors open, things of that nature, and the dogs are corralled in the pool. It was very strange.
Were you the one who personally contacted the police? What was your involvement?
No, my involvement was overseeing and just wondering what was going on. Let's get to the bottom of it.
Well, when police got to the home, they found Chris Benoit's body, his wife's body, and his child's body. They also found steroids in the home. And when asked by reporters if the steroids could have played any part in the murder-suicide, the DA, Scott Ballard, said, quote, "We don't know yet. This is one of the things that we'll be looking at." And yet, almost immediately after, the WWE comes out with a statement saying steroids, quote, were not and could not be related to the cause of death. How could you possibly know that? The toxicology reports are out. They're not going to come back for several weeks. So how can you so definitively say steroids played no part?
Well, we didn't say that. In essence, what we're...
That's a quote.
Well, I understand it. And our reaction, by the way, was reacting to the hysteria of the media, which quite naturally they want to get to the bottom of this, as we do.
But Mr. McMahon, the quote is steroids were not and could not be related to the cause of death. That's very specific.
it's very specific, but it was relating to the word rage because of the steroid rage that everyone was using. And obviously this is not an act of rage, it's an act of deliberation when you do something like this over 3 days. It's not an act of rage, be it steroid rage or roid rage, whatever it's called, or any other rage. That's what we're referring to. There's no way, quite frankly, that we and or the media, it's all speculation until the toxicology reports come back. It's all speculation.
But because it's all speculation, I'm guessing, why were you so clear in saying you did not believe that steroids played a part? Steroids are found in the house again. Right. He has a history of violence by his own wife's account. And steroid use can also cause depression and paranoia, and that can also lead people to do crazy things. Doesn't have to be rage alone.
Right. I agree with that. There were a number of prescription medications as well found in the house, and whether or not they had anything to do with this behavior, who knows, and whether or not there were other aspects involved in his life that had something to do with this behavior. Hopefully we can find out in some way. This has been so devastating as a father and a grandfather and a father figure to all those associated with our brand. This is not what we're about. What we're about is putting smiles on people's faces. This is the opposite of what we do. We're entertainers. We entertain people all over the world, and we put smiles on faces. That's our job description, not something like this to be tainted and smeared with this. It's no different than if you're a postal worker. You still use the post office, but obviously there's been problems there, too. There are problems everywhere. There was no indication whatsoever that this man could possibly turn into this monster and do what he did. And again, we want to know the answers just like everyone else. Steroids may or may not had something to do with this. Other prescription drugs, other pressures in terms of his son and his wife. I don't know, and some of this perhaps we'll never know. But hopefully we can put it to bed as best we possibly can and determine once we have real evidence in terms of the toxicology report.
But there's long been a history of suspected steroid use when it comes to pro wrestlers. How do you police these wrestlers?
Well, the way we do it now, back in February of last year, we instituted a wellness policy that not only polices steroids, but prescription drugs, or I should say the abuse of prescription drugs.
Is that just essentially blood tests that you administer? Or?
No, it's a urine test, blood test, things of that nature to determine all these factors, as well as we instituted as well a cardiovascular aspect in terms of heart disease or heart failure. So it's a very comprehensive test. It was put into place back in February. And the last test that Chris Benoit took of a random nature was in April, which he was totally negative. That doesn't mean that he wasn't taking prescription medication and perhaps even steroids when this happened. We don't know. Whether or not that had an adverse effect on his behavior is going to be determined by people far more important than I am.
And you talk about your business being tainted. At the same time, it seems like early death is almost an occupational hazard when it comes to pro wrestling. 60 wrestlers under the age of 65 have died since 1985, some because of steroid use or suspected steroid use. You have wrestlers being interviewed who talk about being addicted to painkillers and alcohol. You make tons of money off these people. What is your responsibility to them, and not just to them, but to their families? It's not just Chris Benoit who's dead.
No.
It's his wife, and it's a 7-year-old child.
No question about that. We've had 5 individuals during the course of, since we've been in business, who passed away that were under contract to us. I can't speak to all the rest of these individuals you're making reference to, and don't even know if that's true, nor do you. But aside from that, we've had 5 under our watch.
It's disingenuous to say that you don't believe that there is suspected steroid use within the wrestling community.
No, I didn't. Did you hear me say that, Meredith?
Well, what are you saying then, sir?
I'm not sure
I understand what you're saying.
What I'm saying is that of these individuals and this number you're throwing out, I can only speak to 5 individuals who have passed away who were under contract to us. One was Chris Benoit by suicide, another was an accident with Owen Hart, and 3 of heart failure. I can only speak to those 5.
If it turns out, Mr. McMahon, that Chris, there were steroids in his system at the time that this happened, what impact do you believe that will have on not just pro wrestling, but on you and your reputation as well?
Well, again, I can only speak to our wellness program and how effective that is. And if you could interview our performers, and athletes, they would certainly tell you how effective the program really is. So I think all we can do is do the very best we can as anyone else and establish this wellness program, which we have, that hopefully will ensure as best as possible the health and physical and mental well-being of our performers.
But will it change at all your policing of these performers, if it's determined that indeed there were steroids in his system? Given the magnitude here, again, not just Chris is dead, his wife is dead, his child is dead.
Look, this is an horrific tragedy. It happened in pro wrestling. I think there's a rush to judgment here, you know, as to what caused this. There's this almost a hysteria around this. And you can point...
Unjustified, you think?
I don't know whether it was justified or not, Meredith. And you know what? We really won't know until we get the toxicology reports back. And once you get those back, those are real facts. There are other things. We're not trying to hide from the fact that we are who we are, or that Benoit was a part of our organization. Unfortunately, he was. There was no way of telling this man was a monster. No way of knowing that whatsoever. He was a mild-mannered individual.
And in any way does pro wrestling contribute to the creation of monsters?
Absolutely not. You know, everyone that's in this organization, to my knowledge, is well-adjusted, family people. No, they go to work like everybody else, except their definition of what their job is to put a smile on somebody's face. They're performers, and they do their jobs very, very well. And it's important that our organization continue to do that for the whole world of our fans, is to move on for this as best we possibly can, notwithstanding a devastating tragedy we all are feeling, and to try and get back to work and try and do our jobs.
Mr. McMahon, we greatly appreciate you being with us this morning.
I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, Meredith.
So much.
Okay.
And now on a much, I'm sorry, now it's 7:19, and here's David.